Welcome to JMW's Inside Man YouTube channel. David Smith is a partner within JMW's London office and is a data protection specialist. Now, as you would expect, a conversation between you and I, David, was all about data protection. I know you're going to the UK Reef property event. What data protection issues will you be talking about there?
So one of the things I think is really increasingly interesting at the moment is that we're seeing a lot more build to rent. And of course, a lot of people at UK Reef are looking at the build to rent space. And of course, people are building quite large developments now, maintaining the control of them and then renting them out, which is absolutely fine. What I think is a concern about this area is that there's a lot of technology now baked into these systems. A lot of them have, for example, always on Wi-Fi. They often use key cards to allow people to move around in a very hotel-like way. They will often offer additional facilities like gyms or cinemas and keep fit classes and all kinds of other things. I think the thing that's concerning about this is that increasingly these businesses are collecting a tremendous amount of quite sensitive personal data, and many of them are doing so without really thinking about it. So you might think, well, you have a keycard access system, that's not collecting anything. But in fact, all keycard access systems log key carding, and that data is often maintained, and people may not think much about it and may not even actively intend to use it, but they're holding the data. And therefore, it's held under the GDPR. And of course, what I'm particularly concerned about is misuse of that data. So for example, if you have Wi-Fi across your whole building, you are in effect tracking people's mobile phones moving around your building, and that data is being retained and someone could misuse it. If you use key cards, you can track how people move around your building. And again, you may not actively use that data, but your employees could misuse that data. And we've seen examples of that in other situations. And so you end up with situations like you might have two people who live in separate apartments and are both married, but who both end up going to the gym at the same time and returning to one of their apartments. That is data that can be used for blackmail purposes, and that is problematic from the perspective of an employer. And I think one of the things that's particularly interesting about this at the moment is that far more people need to consider what it is that they're doing with data, what data they're collecting, how they're retaining it, how they're using it, and what steps they're taking to make sure that it isn't just floating around their organization waiting to be misused. And that's an area which the build to rent sector, I think, needs to sharpen its act up. And that's one of the things I'll certainly be discussing with people next week.
And as you were speaking then, there were all sorts of alarm bells ringing in my head. I was even thinking of the example that you then went on to give. What sort of safeguards would you be suggesting then that organizations should put in place?
Well, I think the first thing they need to understand is what data they're collecting. And many organizations, very few people are doing this intentionally. They're collecting the data because they have bought and installed systems that collect data as a matter of course, and then they're not really thinking about it. So I think organizations need to think about what they're collecting, why they're collecting it. If they don't want to collect it, they need to turn off logging functionality and stop collecting that data to the extent possible. They need to secure access to that data so it's not just easily available to anybody. And they probably need to start thinking about active deletion policies. And finally, of course, they should, of course, be notifying data subjects through a privacy notice that they are, in fact, collecting that data as they're legally obliged to do. And of course, by doing the latter, the last thing, you will almost end up doing all the other things, because, of course, the first thing that will happen is that one or more interested people will say, well, hang on a minute, why am I collecting all this stuff about me? And you'll be immediately put under some pressure to start to reduce that. And I think that's the right way to go. I mean, it's not that I think that these businesses are doing it for any malicious or purpose. It's simply that technology is installed in their buildings that they're not necessarily fully alive to. And it's important that, and one of the key elements of the GDPR was to make people more aware of this kind of collection, what is sometimes called passive collections. You're not actively collecting data, it's just being picked up in the course of business. And then either using it legitimately with notification, or actually making sure you don't use it and clearing it away from the systems.
And how can you and JMW's data protection team help, well, not only businesses that are going to UK Reef, but more generally the property sector, as a whole? Yeah,
so obviously we've thought about this issue. It's something we're talking about. And we've got plenty of experience in helping people put together data mapping exercises and doing all the policies and notices and all the things that go with it. So we can certainly assist businesses in thinking about the kind of issues I've raised and how to address them.
I'm Dominic Walker, JMW's Inside Man.